The arguments that somehow the Constitution does not apply to the underwear bomber have been rejected by the Supreme Court every time it has examined a claim by a president that he can deny rights to someone in the government's custody. Unless and until the Congress declares a lawful war, the president lacks the tools of war. This is an argument I have discussed extensively in a recent Los Angeles Times op-ed entitled "The Case Against Military Tribunals." This describes the constitutional horrors of allowing federal agents or even presidents to decide to whom the Constitution applies and to whom it does not apply. The courts have ruled consistently that, absent a formal declaration of war, the Constitution protects everyone restrained by the government, no matter what the government thinks they know, and no matter the circumstances of their arrest. Joining me now to talk about all this, Jacob Hornberger, the president of the Future for Freedom Foundation and the author of a recent article. Jake, you were always keeping me up at night with these articles. The CIA assassination and the war on terrorism. Jake, welcome back to Freedom Watch.
It's always nice to be here, Judge.
I am so tired of the arguments that I'm going through. It's like I'm shoveling against the tide when I interview people, not you and not people on Freedom Watch, but others, from both parties saying the guy in the airplane over Detroit was a terrorist. We shouldn't give him rights, as if the government confers rights. We should just put him in a black hole, do whatever we have to get information out of him, and let him stay there. Do these people forget that everyone in the government has taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, that the Constitution protects persons? This guy is a person. He's entitled to the same rights as the rest of us.
Well, they do forget it. They just block out of their minds that this is a system under a constitution, which is the highest law of the land that we, the people, have imposed on government officials. In the U.S. Code, no one can deny that terrorism is a federal criminal offense. That's why a federal grand jury indicted this guy. That's why they're prosecuting him. And what these people are saying is, look, just ignore the law, ignore the U.S. Code, ignore the Constitution, turn him over to the military, torture him, make him talk, and possibly then turn him back into a criminal defendant. It goes against everything this country stands for.
The last time the Supreme Court of the United States authorized the federal government to try a foreigner in front of a military tribunal because of alleged violation of the rules of war here in the U.S. was during World War II, a case called, you know this case, Jake, In re Quiren, Q-U-I-R-E-N. And the Supreme Court there said the only reason we're letting FDR do this is because the federal government, the Congress of the United States, declared war on the government that sent these people here. They were Nazi saboteurs who arrived in civilian clothes and attempted to blow up munition plants in the United States. Question. Well, not question, statement, Jake. We haven't declared war on anybody. Without the declaration of war, can the president claim the tools of war?
Of course not. And I'd take it a step further. That, you know, these guys in World War II were part of a nation state in which we were involved in a declared war. What we're dealing with here with terrorism is a federal criminal offense dealing with a group of people that are committing criminal offenses that they then want to turn into an act of war at their option. See, they want to flip back and forth. Hey, we'll treat this guy over here as a criminal defendant. We'll treat this guy as a warrior. We'll switch them back and forth and whatever. It's like the drug war. It'd be no different than if they all of a sudden said, let's declare war on drugs, which of course they already have, and treat these guys as enemy warriors, simply because maybe the military is involved like it is in Mexico or Colombia and whatever. Well, this is ridiculous. This is simply the military acting in a police capacity. Doesn't mean that just because the military is involved that it's war. It's they're behaving as a police force, an overwhelming police force, but they're still subject to the rules that govern the police.
All right, so calling something a war doesn't make something a war. I mean, at one point, the White House declared war on Fox. I guess that means they could drag O'Reilly or Beck before a military tribunal by that theory. Or there's a war on the mob. Are they going to put aging mobsters on trial in Guantanamo Bay? How easy it is to forget the basic values of America when the object of the government's wrath is so unpopular. But really, isn't that why we have a Constitution? To prevent the tyranny of the majority, Jake?
That's exactly what the framers were doing, is that they understood that the majority can be among the most tyrannical groups ever. That was the idea of let's enumerate these rights in the Bill of Rights, and they made it clear that just because we're enumerating some doesn't mean that there's not a lot more. But they wanted to make it clear that we're going to protect a despised minority, the minority that everyone hates, resents, or whatever, from this type of tyrannical action. And you know, Judge, they're not just jailing these people without due process now. Now they're assassinating them. I mean, they've got this program saying, well, we won't bother with jailing these suspected terrorists, people that they suspect are terrorists. We don't bother giving them a trial. We're just going to assassinate them. And that includes Americans, by the way, also.
Well,
right now it's Americans overseas, but you never know when they're going to carry it over here in this country.
Could you imagine how we would react if, let's say, some very unpopular group, let's take an example, Mexican drug lords at the Mexico-Texas border were being assassinated by drones in the air from the government of China. Now, nobody really wants Mexican drug lords interfering with our peace and prosperity and freedom. But would we want a foreign government doing it? And aren't we basically doing the same thing? I mean, the New York Times reported that President Obama has unleashed 57 drone attacks in 12 months in office. That's more than President George W. Bush did in 8 years in office.
Well, that's right. And I mean, and another good example is, you know, there's a suspected terrorist named Jose Posada Carriles living in Florida. He's the guy who is suspected of having downed a Cuban airline over Venezuelan skies, killing a bunch of Cuban civilians, including members of a sports team, you know, students. And they want him back for trial. There's an extradition agreement between the two countries. And the U.S. government says, we're not going to extradite this guy. He has former CIA ties. Well, what if Venezuela started firing missiles in the United States, sending agents in here to kidnap this guy, bombing buildings in which he lives, trying to assassinate him? Would not this be considered an act of war against the United States? Wouldn't Americans be outraged, and rightfully so? Well, that's exactly the way the U.S. government is behaving.
Jake, you ask great questions, and it's always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
It's always an honor, Judge. Thank you.
You can catch today's show on foxnews.com/freedomwatch and on Sirius 145 XM 168 or online at foxnewstalk.com at 6 p.m. Saturdays. From New York, defending freedom. Until the next time, stay free, America.